Hello everyone. This morning I got a message from my friend Joe. Now Joe, you may recall, has loaned me a few Renaults from his collection over the past year or two, starting with a Mk Coupe 16 valve, the original F7R model. More recently I've driven his Mark 1 Renault Twingo and his Renault 11. But today he was in my neck of the woods with a car, the likes of which I've not driven since I owned one over 20 years ago. Today I'm back behind the wheel of a Mark II Renault Clio. Now, to begin today's story, I'm going to take you all the way back to 1998 when a new Renault Clio was about to launch. Now, the Mark 1 Renault Clio had been hugely successful in Europe and the UK. The UK in particular really fell in love with the car and a certain TV personality. That's right, Renault were masters of running television ads back in the 1990s for their cars. The best known ads, of course, were the ones for the Renault Clio, starring Estelle, better known to many of us as Nicole, and Papa. Now, something you may not have known is Estelle didn't actually have a driving licence when the first Renault Clio ads aired. But anyway, before we drift too far off topic, it's 1998, a new Clio is about to launch, and a rumour started to circulate. Yep, it was time to cut the strings as Nicole was about to get married. But to who? This was a question that plagued the nation, and in a TV advertisement scheduled to be right in the middle of one of Britain's most popular soap operas, we would find out the answer. So the advert starts to roll and we see a blue 5-door Renault Clio RSI, the then range-topping model, driven by the one and only Bob Mortimer, well known as part of TV duo Reeves and Mortimer. So Bob is rushing to stop a wedding. His mission is to stop Nicole from marrying Vic Reeves. Naturally he succeeds and they both disappear off in the Renault Clio to live happily ever after. And that was the last we ever saw of Nicole. It has been rumoured that Nicole could appear again in a future advert, but we'll have to wait and see. Try and clear some of the bugs off this windscreen before we go any further. I always remember how these Mark II Clios had a pantograph windscreen wiper on the driver's side. That was so that Renault didn't have to switch over the wipers for the right-hand drive cars. Obviously designed to cut costs, but actually does a reasonable job of clearing the windscreen. But I'm in danger of sounding a little too much like Hubnut at this point. Renault Clio initially was available with a 1.2 litre Diet engine. That was actually designed with fewer moving parts and it was all geared up for efficiency. The other petrol engines in the range was a 75 horsepower 1.4 and a 1.6 litre, the K7 M8 valve with 90 horsepower, which is the engine used in my Mark 1 Mk Coupe. There were also some 1.9 litre diesel engines as well. Renault had set standards with the Mark 1, so they were set to do the same again with the Mark 2. It had a very similar design in its body structure to the Megane, which had already taken 4 out of 5 stars under the old Euro NCAP system. Early cars came with a driver's airbag, with a passenger one optional, and side airbags to be due at a later date. Also due at a later date was the 1.6 litre 16 valve engine, the car initially to be known as the 16 valve. When the car was updated, the model lineup got a bit of a refresh, and we got some new trim levels. And that brings me on to the car I'm in today, because this is a Clio RSI. Now, I had the Clio Grand and later a Phase 2 Dynamique with 1.2, 8 and 16 valve engines respectively. But as I say, this was a slightly hotter flavour. This is the 110 horsepower engine. That will move this car to 60 miles per hour in around 9.5 seconds and onto a top speed of 122 miles per hour. So pretty nippy. Now, this car on a W registration is actually the same year of registration as my first Mark II Clio. And yeah, as I say, I went from a Renault 5 straight to a Mark II Clio, and although mine was much more basic model, it was still pretty well equipped, but it didn't have all the sportier bits like alloy wheels and things that young drivers want on their cars. So I always lusted after the S, which a friend of mine had in lazuli blue, that added alloy wheels, fog lamps, sport seats, these glorious white dials which were the height of late 90s and early 2000s sophistication. The S had the 1.48 valve, the SI the 1.4 16 valve, and this being the RSI had the 1.6. Now, the 1.4 is almost as quick as the 1.6 litre car, but it was half the number of insurance groups under the old system, so there was a compelling argument for going for that model. The RSI, though, does give you more torque and certainly is more tractable at lower RPM. Those smaller engines, to get the best out of them, you're probably going to have to wring them out a little bit more. The RSI also gains you this nice half leather upholstery. It also gains you some interesting trim around the electric window switches and around the air vents. You also got electric mirrors and generally some better fittings than what you did in the lesser models. You also got an electric tilt and slide sunroof and air conditioning as standard in this car. Some rather interesting 14-inch Taurus alloy wheels. Now, these are a dual tone design on them. Quite divide opinions. That I weren't so keen in period, but I think they do look quite good on the car now in hindsight 20 years later. Again, very much of the time. They are of course wrapped in 185 wide tyres. Now, all Phase 1 Renault Clios had hydraulic power steering. In the Phase 2s, they actually went over to electrically assisted power steering, with the exception of the Renault Sport models, which had joined the lineup very, very late in Phase 1 production. Of course, all the sport line models, right from the 1.4 litre or 1.2 16 valve right towards the end before the facelift, all the way through to the 2 litre Renault Sport models, all of those models had sports suspension and sports ratio steering, and it really did make a difference to these cars and the way that they drove. Now, this car steers really, really well. There's hardly any dead spot in the centre of travel. It doesn't change direction quite in the same way as my Megane Coupe. It's maybe not as composed, but it's certainly not far off. Say it's actually not quite as softly sprung, so there is actually considerably less body roll than in my 1.6 Coupe. Now, I noticed that this car has a Renault Sport aluminium gear knob, and Joe happened to mention that this car has actually got the gear linkage from a Renault Sport model, and that sort of shortens the throw and really sharpens it up, because Renaults of this era generally did have quite a lot of throw on their gear linkages, and it's a huge improvement to this car. You may have also noticed this car sounds quite raughty, and that's because it's got a stainless steel back box fitted. But other than that, Joe has done his best to keep this car as standard as possible. Now, last year he did have the misfortune of having a little accident in this vehicle. And when I say little, I'm talking about a horse running out from a woodland right in front of him with no warning, and caused considerable damage to the front end of this car. Anyone else may have just given up and scrapped the car, but not Joe. Joe has done extensive work to put this car back on the road, and considering the damage that occurred, I can't believe how tight this car is. It does drive really, really well. Squeaks and rattles, well, yeah, there's an odd few. It is quite an old car now, but as I was saying to Joe, when I had these cars brand new, the sunroofs used to creak on them. I remember also the front seats on the 3-door cars, they had a quick connector for the airbag. They used to sometimes cause issues and put the airbag warning light on. In fact, the dealers used to cure that by soldering the joints up. But other than that, these cars are actually quite robust. The 1.4 16 valve and 1.6 16 valve do sometimes suffer with coil pack issues, and if one goes down you really do need to replace them in pairs, otherwise you will find that the other one will fail shortly after. But as I say, other than that, these cars really are quite durable. Another good thing with these cars, especially if you end up having to rebuild one after an accident, is the front wings are actually made of plastic on these cars. These was a feature that was sort of new on the Clio, but Renault have stuck with it to this day. You've still got plastic wings on all modern Renaults, including my 2018 Mk 4 Megane. And one thing, the turning circle's not great on these cars. Me and Joe were discussing this. I'm not sure if with this car having the wider tyres, Renault may have wound in the stops a little bit. Turning circle's not terrible by any means, it's just not exactly class leading. It really is easy to forget sometimes how much cars have really come along. I mean, this was quite a well-spec car for its day, with fingertip controls behind the steering wheel for the radio, as I say, 2 airbags, 3 headrests in the back, a 3-point belt in the centre at the back, albeit only for tall people because it's suspended from the roof and yeah, is likely to cut into the neck of smaller passengers. But yeah, as I say, these were great little cars, and I've really enjoyed being back in one after all this time. Like I say, I actually owned 2 of these back in period. I was proud as punch to have my first Mk2 Clio when I was 18, brand new. The second one I had a year later. As it happens, Renault was running one of those free insurance deals that everyone was doing in the 90s, and it actually erased the negative equity that I had in the car at the time. I dare say many of you may have also owned Renault Clios, or maybe you owned something else like a Saxo VTR back in period, another vehicle that I've actually reviewed on the channel before. If you have, do let me know in the comments, it'd be great to hear your thoughts. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to see more future content. Before I sign off, I also need to say a big thank you to Joe for bringing this car down today, albeit it was a little bit last minute, so it didn't give me much time to plan, but it's just been great, as I say, getting back behind the wheel of one of these fun little cars after such a long time. Really is great fun to take this car around a roundabout. But I will catch you in a future video very soon. Thank you very much for watching.